Do you know what's coming up in the church calendar this week? Did you even know there is such a thing as the church calendar? Today I'm going to talk about the season of Lent, what it is, why some Christians practice and others don't, and finally why I think you should consider participating if you never have. My name is Eric Jones, and I've been a student and teacher of theology in some form or fashion for nearly 20 years. I'm here to help you embrace a realist version of Christianity, one that takes seriously the claims of the Bible and yet is not beholden to literalism. So, what is Lent? Lent is a 40-day fast stretching from Ash Wednesday to Holy Saturday, which is the day before Easter. It's a time of preparation and anticipation. Contrary to popular belief, Christmas is not the most important holiday in the Christian calendar, even though our society really treats it like that. In fact, Easter is the most important holiday. The reality of the resurrection is celebrated every Sunday because Christ rose on Sunday morning. This is why the early church went from celebrating the Jewish Sabbath on Saturday to gathering for corporate worship on the first day of the week, Sunday, to commemorate the resurrection, to celebrate it. And then they would partake in the Lord's Supper or the Eucharist weekly, which was a feast to celebrate the new covenant. If you were counting when I mentioned that it is a 40-day fast, you'll notice that it's actually 46 days from Ash Wednesday to Holy Saturday. What's with the 6-day difference there? The 6 Sundays in Lent don't count as fast days. In fact, every Sunday is a feast day. Every Sunday is a day in which we celebrate the resurrection. We celebrate the fact that Jesus defeated sin and death by rising again. The whole season of Lent is built into anticipation of Easter Sunday, where we examine ourselves. And I mentioned that as a fast, it's about examination, taking a look at ourselves, taking a look at those things that bind us, those things that distract us, that divert our attention from God. And it's about giving them up for a period of time for the purpose of focusing on God, for the purpose of focusing on our relationship with Him, for the purpose of saying, God, I want you more than I want this thing. It's about calibrating our hearts to the gospel, to the reality that life is only found, as Peter said to Jesus, life is only found in Him. It's about calibrating our hearts to that. So why do some Christians observe Lent and others don't? I grew up in a Christian home in a tradition that did not observe Lent. In fact, I didn't even know really what Lent was until I got to my undergrad at the age of about 22. My only experience with Lent prior to that was in my hometown. The Catholic Church had a fish fry, and I noticed that some of my Catholic friends just wouldn't eat meat throughout the week, except for they would have fish on Fridays at the fish fry at church. That was my only experience with Lent up until my undergrad, at which point I began to learn about fasting. Fasting was not really something that we ever did in my church growing up. It was never talked about. So, here are 4 reasons why I think some Christians abstain from Lent. The first one is it speaks to my experience and it speaks to why my church didn't talk about Lent or didn't participate. It's the fact that there was a suspicion of ritual. Any church tradition that was ritualistic and really put the emphasis on our actions and what we do was viewed as some sort of works righteousness. It was viewed as some sort of attempt by us to earn favor with God. And so it was suspicious. It was too Catholic, quote unquote. That's putting it negatively. I think there's a positive spin on that because I think one thing that my upbringing has done and has taught me is the recognition that we can't compel God through our actions. We can't force God to bless us by doing something. We can't force God to do what we want. And I think that was a very healthy and accurate way of approaching it. I think it was a misinterpretation of the reason behind Lent and the reason that Christians participate. It's not that we're trying to curry favor with God. It's more so just a recognition that we can't do this whole life on our own. And often, very good things get in the way and distract us from the God who gives us life. That's really the logic and the rationale there that we missed. I think there's another reason that some Christians don't participate in or don't observe Lent, and that is an ignorance of church history. I don't mean that in a mean way. I'm just saying they didn't know. Like in my case, growing up, I just didn't know the rich history of Lent. I didn't know how far back this stretched. Augustine, Tertullian, these church fathers, they practiced Lent. And in fact, they stated that the apostles themselves observed Lent. I just did not have any understanding that this practice is almost as old as the Eucharist itself. The Eucharist itself dates to Maundy Thursday, and Lent, if you're to take Augustine and Tertullian at their word, Lent is practiced by the apostles themselves right after the resurrection, after the ascension of Jesus. Now, we don't see that specifically in Scripture. We don't have an authoritative account of the apostles abstaining from food for 40 days. We don't have a biblical account of that. But two titans in the early church have both claimed that it was done, even if we don't have the official record of it. And I think the final reason why some Christians don't participate in Lent is the fact that it's hard. It is hard to fast from something, especially good things, for any length of time, let alone 40 days. It's hard. It's difficult. It requires commitment. It requires strength that, frankly, I think only comes from God. So those are the reasons I think Christians abstain from Lent. Now, I want to give you 4 reasons why Christians do observe Lent. So it begins with the fact that Jesus himself, after his baptism, he went into the desert for a period of 40 days and he fasted. He prepared himself for his ministry, culminated in his resurrection, by fasting for 40 days. In some way, you could abbreviate that and say that Jesus prepared himself for the resurrection, the ultimate goal of his ministry, by fasting for 40 days. Not only that, in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says, when you pray, when you give to the poor, and when you fast. Jesus has the assumption that this is something that his followers are going to do, and they are going to do periodically, that there will be times of fasting, and there will be times dedicated to prayer, and there will be times dedicated to giving to the poor. That's the first reason. Jesus himself fasted for 40 days, and then Jesus has the expectation that his followers will fast. He doesn't go into detail and say that it'll be for a certain amount of time or give details surrounding how long that would be, but his example was 40 days. The second reason is the motivation in Hebrews chapter 12. This is the great cloud of witnesses passage. The author says that, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, therefore shed every weight and sin which entangles us, and run the race with endurance. If we're to think of our Christian life as a race, an endurance race, a marathon, we need to shed every weight and sin. Obviously, we want to shed the sins, right? We don't want to sin. If we belong to Jesus, we don't want to sin. We don't want to stay there. We want to progress and become more and more like him. That's obvious. But the weight line there, shed every weight and sin. These weights, these are not bad things. These are not things that should automatically just be out of our lives. These are things that can be in our life, but if we are running with these things, if we are trying to endure, they can hinder us. They can make us, they're unnecessary weights. If you're going to run with a backpack full of rocks, you're going to have a harder time enduring. So the author of the Hebrews is telling us to lay those things down, to take those off. They entangle us. The idea here in that culture is that the runners, when you think of the original Olympics, the runners would show up in these brightly colored robes, and I imagine similar to what we see boxing. or UFC, and the way these fighters come to the ring and they're dressed up. There's a level of pomp and circumstance in that culture as runners are approaching the beginning of the race. But then they take off the robe and they are actually streaking. They're running butt naked, running the race. There's nothing to entangle them. There's nothing for them to trip on. They're not wearing clothes to trip on. That's the idea that the author to the Hebrews is appealing to. He is stating that we need to take things off as we run. These good things in life, set them aside in order to run with endurance. The idea is that Lent is a particular time where we focus on removing things, removing distractions, where we can actually focus on God himself. We can actually focus on the fact that he is our provider and that any good thing that we get is ultimately a gift from him. We want to love the gift giver more than the gift itself. We want to be attached to the giver rather than the gift. The third reason Christians observe Lent, I had mentioned it already before, but this is a tradition that stretches back to the apostles themselves. And Augustine and Tertullian refer to it in the fact that the apostles themselves practiced it. This is a long-standing observation. And my disposition is that if the church has been doing something for a long time, we need to have good reason to not do it, rather than have to have a good reason to do it. It's a disposition thing. We are not bound by church history. We don't have to observe Lent simply because Christians before us have observed Lent. But at the same time, if so many Christians before us have observed Lent, we really need a good reason not to follow in their footsteps. The fourth reason is experientially, fasting is incredibly beneficial. I have never done a fast and afterwards thought, I wish I hadn't have done that. I really would have rather had coffee than that extra time in prayer. I really would have rather had TV rather than the time and study. It's incredibly beneficial to fast. This is a season in which you can fast and you can do it in community. You're not on it alone. You're not the only one trying to do something. In fact, you can be encouraged by the fact that, as difficult as it is, your brothers and sisters are doing it as well, and they are struggling as well. But collectively, we can spur each other on and remind each other and point to Jesus and say, Jesus is our prize. Jesus is the one that we want. We want Jesus. We don't want more TV. We want Jesus. We don't want social media. We want Jesus. We don't want caffeine. We want Jesus. We don't want you name it. Why observe Lent? Why participate in a fast, especially given this long? I think the number one reason to do that is it's incredibly beneficial. It is incredibly beneficial to focus your time and your attention, to focus your resources on God. Nobody who's ever done that has regretted it. I guarantee you won't either. We really do love the gift giver rather than the gifts. We really do prefer God to our coffee. We prefer God to social media and to streaming and TV and whatever else it may be. If you do prefer God, if you do need a spiritual jump start right now to your walk, I would encourage you to fast, to participate in the 40-day fast. Now, with this, remember, there's 46 days here and only 40 days are fasting days. We don't fast on Sundays, so you can allow yourself whatever it is that you determine, and I'll give you some advice on how to pick something to abstain from here in a moment. But you're only fasting for the 40 days, and you can allow yourself on Sunday to participate. This fast it's not a weight loss routine. The proper reason, the proper posture here is about focusing on God. It's about preparation. It's about anticipation for the resurrection. It's about anticipation for our salvation, right? When we will be resurrected, just as Christ did, as Paul makes that point in 1 Corinthians 15. Why do this? Because it'll jumpstart your faith. If you are focused on God, and you are willing to deprive yourself of good things in pursuit of God Himself, you will find Him. The Bible says that if you will seek Him, you will find Him. It will remove distractions and it will help you to focus on what is truly important. How do we observe Lent? Well, I have this wonderful book that I would absolutely encourage any of you to purchase. I will have a link in the description to this on Amazon. Sacred Seasons, a family guide to center your year around Jesus. And so it goes through the whole church calendar and it will explain it and it will do that. This has been a phenomenal book to guide my thinking on the church calendar and different practices and rhythms throughout the church year. Danielle Hitchin is the author here. So, but she has some helpful suggestions here about figuring out what it is that you're going to fast from. So she gives three questions here to ask yourself. So again, it's an introspective time. It's a time of examination. It's a time to look inward and see what's really going on here. And so here, here she says, to that end, consider these questions when trying to determine what you will fast from during Lent. Number one, when I am tired or stressed, what things do I turn to in order to help me relax, decompress, or escape? It's a phenomenal question. We all run to things. We all try and numb. We all try and use things that are not prayer, that are not communing with God to decompress, to relax, and to escape. And often those just become compulsions. When I am tired or stressed, what things do I turn to in order to help me relax, decompress, or escape? Number two, do I routinely make non-essential purchases that could be ceased for a time in order to redirect that money to those in need? Remember, Lent is about three spiritual practices. Fasting is a big one. This would be a fast from certain purchases, but it's redirecting those resources that would normally go to impulse buys or non essential things, and it's redirecting those to those in need. So, the third question here that she raises is, when I consider my daily routine, what are my favorite parts of my day? Do I love those things more than I love my time with the Lord? That's a convicting one because I struggle with the routine of a daily quiet time or dedicated time in prayer. I struggle with that personally. It's never been a consistent habit in my life like I wish it would be. By the time you're an adult and you're learning about these things for the first time, it's really difficult to establish those habits. This is a convicting question because when I think about my favorite parts of my day, I really enjoy my job. I really love my job. I love what I get to do. And do I love that more than I love my time with the Lord? Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes, yes, I do love my job more than I love uh, my time with the Lord. It's certainly more of a priority than reading my Bible a lot of times. That's convicting. To observe Lent, again, it's fasting, praying, and giving. Find something to fast. Find something to give up for 40 days. Something that your heart doesn't want to let go of. Could be a particular kind of food. It could be screen time. It could be some sort of recreational something, like doom scrolling or whatever. It could be any number of things. Fast. In the time that you save by not doing that thing, you redirect that time to prayer. You redirect that desire for caffeine, I'm going to say, or alcohol or meat or whatever it is. You redirect that desire from the gift to the gift giver. Fasting, prayer, and then finally giving. Theoretically, as you're giving something up, that frees resources that you otherwise had. It frees your resources if you're no longer buying meat for these 40 days, or you're significantly cutting that down to only eating meat on Sundays as part of feast day, if that's what you're doing, you could save a whole lot of money that way. And if you just redirect that money to those in need, to maybe a food pantry, or to your local church, or to a missions organization, or whatever, you're freeing up resources and you're redirecting those. In some ways, Lent is all about redirection. It is all about redirecting our minds and our hearts from this world to eternity, from our circumstances to God. It's all about redirection. That's how to observe Lent. Finally, next steps. Give your newfound time and money, redirect that, redirect your desires. Lean into prayer as the cravings come. So whatever it is that you give up, you're going to crave it. You're going to want it. And it's about redirecting that desire for the thing to the thing giver. Let me know what you think in the comments. Have you ever done a 40-day fast? How did it go? Were you able to keep with it, or did you fall off the wagon and then have to get back on and fall out? I'd love to see what your experiences are. God bless.